Hey guys, welcome into another episode of From the Wing. I'm Christian Clark, the Pelicans beat writer for NOLA.com and the Times-Picayune. We are in deep summer now. Summer League is officially over. The Pelicans wrapped up Saturday night with a loss to the Denver Nuggets. They went 0-5 in Summer League. This was not as good of a Summer League team as a couple years ago with Najee and Herb and that team that went 5-0 and Willie Green's first year as head coach when he coached the summer league team, and they were this feel good story. Yep, they were not as good as that. They really struggled. It's just summer league. Who cares? But we're gonna get into some takeaways from the 5 games that we saw in Las Vegas, and then we're going to discuss some of the over under win totals that various odd makers released. A lot of the odds makers had the Pelicans over under kind of in that 45 to 47 wins range. We're going to talk about some reasons for optimism, and then we're going to talk about some reasons for pessimism. I will start with this today, Adam. There's no way around it. Jordan Hawkins really struggled in summer league. Look, I don't think he is a lead guard, and so he was thrust into that role and kind of struggled. But are you? What is your level of concern with just the way Hawk looked in these 5 games in Vegas?
A little while ago, I fired off a tweet that got everybody angry a couple of months ago about not gaslighting people on Jordan Hawkins, because threes are really, really attractive. Making threes on the run is really, really attractive. Fan bases have at times gotten really excited about guys like Gary Trent Jr. and Malik Beasley. And those guys are getting minimum contracts and $6 million contracts for teams right now because they don't do other things. I've never viewed Hawkins as a primary creator type of guy. I don't think that's in his wheelhouse. And that's kind of exclusively what he was in. And I'm going to give him some benefit of the doubt. Like, he hasn't gotten notably bigger. So he is still a dude that's going to run and slip off of screens. He is still a 2 and a 3 more than he's a 1. And look, some muggings were happening in summer league. We were not calling fouls. The fouls that get called in summer league are kind of the atrocious ones, or the climactic contact at the rim with a missed shot. That's all that gets called. So when Hawkins is out on the perimeter getting just shoved off the ball onto the ground, which he did a lot, it looks really bad. But if that happened in an NBA game and he sells that call the same way he did, he's gonna get that call, so it'll look a little bit better. But I just never had I never really had primary ball handler, primary initiator excitement for him. I think he's still got an incredibly long road to go. I also think it's fine. He was a mid-round pick. People like to use the word lotto to make it sound more hyped, but he's a thin guy that can really shoot on the move and hasn't been able to show you anything else yet from a creation or defense standpoint. And I can't really care about his threes or prioritizing him until he can show me something else.
Yeah, I came into summer league understanding. Look, Jordan Hawkins is not a 1. He is not a lead guard. I still maybe was a little surprised just at the he just could not really create any separation, off of the dribble. I mean, that was just really difficult for him over and over again of, you know, trying to create an advantage for the Pelicans in the half court and it resulting in a turnover, or it taking just a very long time in the Pelicans offense kind of looking gunky as a result. I mean, he just couldn't create that separation. He didn't have that wiggle off of the dribble. And yeah, it was a little disappointing to see that. I mean, I think I still, have a understanding of what he is as a player. I mean, he's a guy who needs those advantages created for him, and that's good on a team with, Zion Williamson and DeJounte Murray and Brandon Ingram. I mean, he can have a role here. I think the thing for him is he's just going to have to defend at a certain level to get on the court, and that was really the issue in his rookie year. I mean, he could make shots, but the reason why Jose Alvarado played over him during the stretch run was Will Green, I think mainly just had more trust in Jose defensively. There was a gap between those guys. So he's just got to be good enough defensively. You compared him to Malik Beasley, Gary Trent. These are guys who take half, 2/3 of their shots from three. They don't do a whole lot else, as you say. I still think Hawkins, like some of the stuff he showed last year, like there was some 3-level scoring ability. Like I think he can be more of like a well-rounded scorer than those two guys. But I won't lie, this wasn't terribly encouraging from him. Not that this was, I put too much stock in summer league or anything like that.
Yeah, I think if you took him and put him in his actual role with NBA starter level players, he can hit those elbow jumpers and stuff where he like just gets inside the screen and pulls up. He's going to knock that stuff down too. I see him more as a 2-level guy. I know he's willing to score at the rim, but he's so small that that's never really going to be a reality. Like and we've seen him try, and what happens? Like he meets conflict at the rim and it goes poorly, but he gets up. Like he's got some verticality. And he is a long kid. He's not big, but he's long. So yeah, he does have the potential to do it. And if he ever puts, 10 or 15 more pounds on his body or gets that like Steph Curry lower body program going, maybe you'll see some of that stuff. But rough campaign for him, but weird scenario. Like we're not watching summer league the same way we watch the NBA, saying like, oh, he was terrible, therefore he stinks. And you'll hear this on every podcast across the country that's talking about summer league. Those leagues are dominated by guys who can drive the ball with the ball in their hands. And that's guards and wings that can dribble. And everybody else feeds off of that, which is why it's actually pretty impressive that we had some pop off from our young centers, because they tend to be the ones that have to rely on other people to get fed. And these guards aren't great and these teams aren't great. And we had some pop off from our gigantic athletic centers.
Yeah, I mean, look, there were Carlo and Yves Misi both had moments throughout summer league. I mean, Carlo Makovic had a 25-point game where I think he went 10 of 12 from the field or something like that, like almost perfect shooting. He's pretty skilled. He's pretty athletic. My takeaway on him just coming out of summer league, he's got a chance to contribute to this Pelicans rotation next year. I mean, a lot of that is the product of them just being so thin at the center position. I mean, this team has one true center who has played NBA minutes already on the roster in Daniel Tice. But I think Carlo Makovic has a chance to be a guy that gives them 10 or 15 minutes, on some nights. He does, a number of things well. We'll see how it looks, against that NBA competition, but he looked pretty good. And then Yves Misi, look, the athleticism is there. He just got to get reps, man. That's really all there is to it. Like he just has to get reps. Like he has these moments where like, whoa, blocked it with his right hand, blocked it with his left hand, ran down the floor like a deer, transition dunk. And then he has these moments where it's like he looked like a baby deer. Like he looked like he was just falling over, or he threw the pass into the backcourt and turned it over. I mean, he just got to play enough and eliminate that stuff from his game.
Yeah, the interesting thing about him, like being able to watch him more and watching him, he kind of like grew a little bit through each summer league game. That first game was terrible. Like there was nothing really notable other than that he knew I need to set screens and I need to roll. And that's one thing that, at least for him offensively, instinctively, he is trying to do the thing that he knows he's going to have to live off of. So I'm at least happy about that, because offensively, I think he's got a really, really long way to go. But at least he knows I'm going to do this thing. Defensively is interesting. He's had really good reps as a face-up guard out on the perimeter all the way back to the rim. Like he moves his feet really, really well, regardless of who's in front of him. That's a thing that he just does well. He's also really good as rim help. And he, like, if he knows that the guy, like if it's a sure thing, the guy's going to the rim, he's going to contest it. And even if he's on another defender, he can slip over and get that help. And then all of a sudden you have a shutdown at the rim. The place where he's struggling the most is where you would expect. Defensively, when he's got two guys walking him down to the rim, he struggles with timing. Like, when do I bail on my guy and shift over? And he's late to the decision and either loses body position or just gets over late and ends up fouling. And if you can just very simply have him not jump on those, you can get him on the floor. Like his biggest problem in those situations is he gets there late, he loses body position, then he leaves the floor, he leaves the ground. In the NBA, guys are going to jump up into him and get that foul all day, and he's going to have real problems if he can't cut that down. But there was more promise than I think I would have guessed, especially, the little offensive thing that we mentioned before the draft, the tantalizing thing with him, the athleticism when he gets the ball in his hands and decides to go to the hole. It's surprising what he can instinctively do with the ball when he doesn't have to think. When he just decides, I'm going to the rim, I'm going to do this. Look, he's not making a pass out of that short roll situation, but when he gets the ball and decides to put it on the floor, some pretty fun electric things happen. He had one the other day where he dribbled through two guys and dunked. So, like, for now, simplify it. You're a hard roller, and in the short roll, put it on the floor and try and get in there. Maybe look off the left corner because he's not a creator. But otherwise, like, you're a roll man, and if you get it on the short roll, I want you to go to the hole. If you get it on a hard roll, put it in. I'm cool with that. I saw more than I thought.
Yeah, the Pelicans played the Grizzlies in their second to last summer league game. Zach Edey was active for that game. He didn't end up playing a whole lot because he turned his ankle, and then the camera was over him and he shouted a bunch of expletives, which was like actually kind of a funny moment. I'm glad he's okay. But I was going into that like, oh my gosh, Yves Missia versus Zach Edey, like this is going to be so brutal. And we didn't see it for a whole lot. I mean, Edey blocked this shot pretty resoundingly once, but there was also a play where Missi faced up and went at him and kind of spun and put up with his left hand and made a basket. It wasn't in that very limited amount of time they played against each other. It wasn't as lopsided as I thought it would be. And maybe, if you have more minutes there, maybe it is, and it very well could be. But yeah, Missi had moments, like it's going to take a while for him, but I also don't think he's Bruno Caboclo, 2 years away from being 2 years away. Like, I think, I think he could be a positive contributor on his rookie contract. Absolutely.
Sure.
It was just a bet from the Pelicans that like, we're going to bring this guy into our system, and, basketball is going to be something he's doing every single day, and there will be rapid growth. Like he's got the stuff you can't teach, and he's smart enough to figure out the stuff that you can teach, and we'll see.
It was the right bet too. Like he was the athleticism bet in that portion of the draft. The guys that you could have argued for were gone. The only other argument was Isaiah Collier, and you were trading for DeJounte Murray. So you didn't really need that in the way that you needed a center. And look, the athleticism, the reason you drafted him has shown itself already in a short period of time. And we've talked endlessly about the fact that he is inexperienced, and so he's going to need the reps. He's going to need to learn. He looks like a lot of rookies who haven't played a lot of basketball. If he doesn't think, things go well, and if he does think, things go bad, and that's totally fine. Like it's all relative. The criticism of Missi and the choice of Missi has more to do with depth at the position than it does with him himself. For where he was drafted and what he has shown, there is plenty of promise, and it looks like a good pick.
I think one of the more interesting picks that happened last month in the draft was the Miami Heat at number 15 taking Kel'el Ware. I mean, I think a guy who, if you knew stuff about him going into the draft, maybe you don't think this guy screams Heat culture or anything like that. I thought that was a very interesting selection, and just from what I saw in Summer League, Kel'el Ware looked fantastic. I mean, he's big, he's skilled, he's very talented. I'm definitely keeping an eye on how Kel'el does within Heat culture.
Yeah, so like them and the Spurs, one of the things is like they draft guys that you're like, oh, that's totally a Spurs guy. Oh, that's totally a Heat guy. They also draft guys that they're like, get him into our culture and we'll see what happens. And at least so far, it's initial returns, and he's not playing with he's not training with like Butler and all them. But initial returns look really good. Like all of the promising things we talked about with him, he's the quintessential shot blocking, shooting center. Even if his jumper is a little strange, it looks pretty. Even though the ball like rises up on his forearm.
He's got touch. He's got genuine touch.
Yeah, he looks like he shoots as if he's 6'8" and he's 7 feet tall. So yeah, it's been really good for him. And like you said, it's interesting because he's the opposite end of the spectrum. The concerns were all character motor, and he goes to the place where that's the thing they value more than anything else. But they also manifest it in some guys. So if you believe he's got the talent, especially where you are in the draft, and that's something you need. Like the Heat for years have not had 7-footers on their roster. So it's a nice change for them, something that they could potentially like slide up and play next to Bam and feel good about. So
That's
it's
kind
a
of something
really
we're
interesting
seeing
play
with
for him.
that's kind of something we're seeing with Team USA right now. It's that second unit of AD and Bam, which has just been killing people. I mean, it's been incredible for Team USA. I mean, I guess I don't know whether you consider Bam or AD like who's the 4 and who's the 5 in that lineup, but maybe you try to see that the Heat throw some two big lineups out there with Bam. I think there might be an idea there in Miami of, hey, Bam doesn't have to play center all the time. Like take a little bit of the load off of him, and it's a look we can go to if we want to switch everything, but we don't have to do this all the time.
Yeah, don't tell AD that he was the center, but he was the center. Just don't tell him. Just lie to him. Say, hey, you're the power forward. It doesn't matter. Gentry used to do this with him.
Can I just say this
Um,
about AD? I mean, I think kind of can be a very annoying player. What is he right that he is a power forward? Because we saw the Lakers win the bubble championship with him, playing next to Dwight Howard and JaVale, and we've seen, him and Team USA playing next to a big. I mean, is he actually right that his best position is power forward?
Resoundingly no. The best shooting of his entire life happened the bubble year, and it has never happened again. He cannot play the 4 and do that. Um, he look the it's really comes down to like what are your responsibilities around the rim. It's so weird that he gets so hung up on the word because the thing is he's your best rim defender and he is athletically covers more ground in front of the rim than everybody else. He takes away horizontal and vertical space and moves his feet really well. It doesn't really matter, but his shooting's been pretty horrific outside of that one bubble year. So I guess he gets to be correct for that 1 year. I don't think anybody in the world wants to see him actually be a power forward, including his own team. But they'll add, maybe Jonas Valanciunas in the middle of the year to satiate him until the playoffs. But this has been a weird thing with him forever.
It's going to be so weird if JV ends up there next year.
And
I
look,
was I was
the
happy to see
number
him go east and not go
same,
west in free agency.
but he went east on a number and a contract that's very easily moved come the trade deadline.
It
And I
is.
think he knew that.
Yeah, I think the Valanciunas clan is going to be renting in Washington D.C. and not buying.
Yeah. Yeah. But hey, starter until then, because go take a look at Alex Sarr. Brother, he is not your starting center.
Yeah, I saw that the game he went 0-15. That is tough stuff. Tough stuff.
Look, just to revisit this for 1 second, if you find the people that did like deep reporting on him, if you like, a lot of people believe that him going to Australia was intentional and was to avoid competition and protect his draft stock. And his play style certainly looks like it meshes with that because that man only wants to shoot distance jumpers. And that's pretty weird for like hyper athlete giant man that you need to do both in order to be special. So he just kind of takes the perimeter shots and then they don't go in. And some of them clunk off the glass and off the side of the backboard. And yeah, it's been bad.
Yeah, I mean, it's very possible in 6 months we're like, why didn't the Wizards just take Reed Shepherd?
I think everybody's going to be feeling that way in 6 months.
All right, Adam, we got some over-under win totals from the odds makers. BetMGM, DraftKings, FanDuel all had the Pelicans over-under at 45.5 wins. The Pelicans, of course, won 49 games last season. This is a roster that looks pretty different in some ways, but also the same with Brandon Ingram still being here and a part of the situation. Let's start with, I guess, the case for optimism first, and then maybe we could talk about at the end the ways this could go wrong. David Griffin gave an interview with SiriusXM Radio, and he basically said, "Yeah, we want to play it out." And I think the words "for now" were used in that same paragraph. So we'll see if this changes. But for the purpose of this exercise, let's just act like this is pretty much the roster the Pelicans have an opening night. They still need to sign. They need to add one more player in a standard roster spot. I mean, maybe that's Antonio Reeves, but they've got 13 of the roster spots filled right now. I just wrote down a couple bullet points for the ways this does go right with this team. That's a pretty weird fit. Um, I guess I'll make my little case and then get your thoughts. I think the biggest one is Zion just looks like an all NBA player right from the jump. I mean, it kind of gets a little bit forgotten last year that he wasn't that great or that impactful, especially at the start of last season. Like, it really took him some time. I mean, it took him some time to look like that borderline all NBA guy. He was just kind of okay to good like the first 20, 30 games of the season, and he got much better as the season went along. I think his on-off numbers were really interesting last year. I mean, the Pelicans outscored opponents by 2.9 points per 100 possessions with him on. They outscored opponents by 6.6 points per 100 possessions with him off. That was really the first time in his Pelicans tenure where it's like, oh, they were kind of better with him off the floor than on. So I just think, the Pelicans being really good this year, it would, they could have a top 15 player if Zion, shows up to camp in shape and has some injury luck and just, kind of fulfills his potential. I think another point I've got here, the Pelicans won 49 games last season despite being a terrible crunch time offense. They went 1-7 in games decided by 3 points or less. They were 26th in clutch offense. They obviously added DeJounte Murray with the idea that he's going to improve that. So I just think, hey, look, Pelicans bringing in DeJounte, a guy who hit, I think, 3-game winners last year. He's going to improve that really bad crunch time offense. Like, they just have a go-to guy now, and they can put him in the pick and roll with Zion. I mean, but they have like a clear plan of action now in the clutch. Get the ball to DeJounte and let it flow from there. I think the other two things I've got written down here, the small ball units work, and I could see this going either way. And I think I would probably predict that maybe they don't with Zion because I just don't think he wants to play the 5. But hey, there's a world where they could work. The Pelicans could put a lineup on the floor where all 5 guys are between 6'5" and 6'10". DeJounte Murray, Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, Brandon Ingram, Zion Williamson. That's a lot of talent, Adam. Who's to say they can't work out? And then the other thing is they have depth to survive injuries at lead guard. They can just plug CJ McCollum in there for DeJounte Murray or forward. Brandon Ingram, Zion Williamson, they've missed a lot of time. Let's say Zion missed some time. Well, you'd be really happy you have Brandon Ingram back in that scenario. So I could see it breaking right. Where are you at?
Yeah. So I think, the Zion, I don't need to expand on the Zion point. That is the most important back to last year. The most important thing last year is what is Zion? What potential does he reach? How healthy is he? That is still the main thing is still the main thing. If Zion is all world, your team is good. And for what we saw out of Zion January on, that meant a two-way guy because he was taking defensive assignments. There are still reps you can go look at that are true, like all NBA highlight reps against dudes that were first and second team all NBA. And he was asking for that. So yeah, to the small ball lineup point too, there was a small stretch at the end of the year where there was some very interesting stuff with him and BI taking bigger guys defensively and surviving. It wasn't enough to throw your hat at, it was not like this pile of minutes. It was these individual games where you're like, wow, that actually worked. So for me, the case for the over, it has a lot to do with like the two big sore thumbs, the center position and BI's fit. I think it's kind of undebatable right now that they're probably going to come out with a starting lineup of DeJounte, BI, Herb, Zion, Tice. As far as small ball units go,
wait, let me pause you right there. So you think your prediction is that on opening night, if this is the roster, Willie Green will go DeJounte Murray at the 1, Herb Jones at the 2, Brandon Ingram at the 3, Zion at the 4, Daniel Tice at the 5.
Yes. And I think it's hard to make basketball work otherwise, because small ball is one thing in the NBA. There are teams that try to do it a lot. The Clippers, historically, like, they tried to be like the team full of wings. It does not work. It is not as special and as unique as it used to be. And it is not something, much like pace 10 years ago. You can't just run. You can't just be small and have an advantage all night. It is far more likely for this team that the small ball units are something that you use to kill halves, to end in the final 3 or 4 minutes, so that you don't get exposed defensively, so that you keep a lid on how much exposure you get. And it also may very well be something that they don't want to do a whole lot of on the front end of the year, just to protect guys and like gear up towards come playoff time, because I believe they still have those intentions. So that, yeah, the case for me is like, yeah, Zion's special. I think our understanding of DeJounte Murray as a player, I think the conversation around him has kind of been a little flawed. People either want him to be defensive star or ball hog, and there's like nothing in between. And I think he's a Rondo-esque POA defender. Like, he's a steal gambler who's very long, who can keep his body in front of you, but he's not like a hitching post like a Drew Holiday, where he's going to ride you the whole way and play tough that way. He's a turnover guy. And having him playing in front of a Herb Jones and a Trey Murphy, and like that level of size, and having Zion behind him, is better than anything he's ever played in front of. So I'm not too worried about the defense. And if you look at the Hawks stuff from last year, specifically in the DeJounte only minutes, every one of his teammates played better, and they played great defense for them. They went from 29th in defense to 15th in the time that he led that team. And that's a huge...
Are you talking about when he was out there when Trae Young was hurt? Or
yes,
okay.
From the end of February to the beginning of April, so a stretch of like 20 games that was just him. And I think it was a little bit more than 20. In fact, I can just tell you, I have it here, 23 games. So for the 23 games from February 25th on, so after the Trae Young injury, so it's the 25th all the way to April 9th, his entire starting lineup went from negative players to positive players and plus minus. Every single guy he played with turned the ball over less, played better defense, and in some cases, Clint Capella scored better. And he actually had less depth than they had prior, because he loses Saddiq Bey 8 games into that run. And Onyeka Okongwu was hurt 3 games into that run. So he's playing with like 7, 8 guys that are actually like survivable NBA guys. So I just think his time in Atlanta, like, while Atlanta wasn't that notable, and yeah, he has the 3 game winners, it was actually a little more special from like a raising the floor level than you would have guessed. Like, sure, offensively, things fall off a little bit because he's not this pure creator scorer guy, but it's interesting how similar he is to some of the more gluey point guardy wing defender guys that we all love in this league.
That's kind of who he was that last season with the Spurs, when he was an all-star. I mean, he was an injury replacement, but he did everything that year. I mean, it was like 21 points per game, 9 assists, 8, 9 rebounds, 2 steals. Like, he was impacting the game in a lot of different ways, playing lead guard. And, just his role changed a lot in Atlanta, obviously, next to Trae Young.
So if I have to highlight my points to try and condense my conversation on and get us on to the next portion, I would say, lockstep with you, it's about Zion. At beginning and end of this team is about Zion. The next thing is that the stagger with DeJounte, I believe it would be carry him into like the second rotation, where we used to let BI stay in and play with the backups for a little bit to get his own. I think you do that for CJ. You leave DeJounte in as lead guard and give CJ that support in the backcourt and let that pop off for a little bit. And then BI comes back in while DeJounte takes a rest, and you get a little bit of that, that imperfect blend. But the concern for BI for me is not really, I don't have this big toxicity concern where having him on the team like ruins everything. I think my issue with BI is his usage is going to go down again. And it already went down last year. And he's going to lose 3 or 4 more shots just by nature of who is bringing the ball up the floor. It's not going to be him that much. So he is truly pushed into probably the most leveraged scenario he's ever been in on a basketball floor relative to you're going to touch the ball less. So you better shoot it when you have it. And we've talked endlessly about a guy that's dribbled and eaten up the clock and then pulled up. Now, if he wants to score near the same levels and he wants to be a guy that gets a big contract, he kind of is forced by the floor and the makeup of this roster to be the guy we've always asked him to be the guy that's willing to shoot those catch and shoots, that's willing to shoot those transition threes, because he's just not going to touch the ball enough to score 18 points a game. So if that goes well, and I think there's a small ball finishing unit that works. That lineup you called out is the one that plays like the final 3 minutes of a game, and it's pick and rolls and switch heavy defense, and it's just too much speed and too much ball deflection for anybody to run anything against it, and it's not overexposed.
So let me ask you this. I think we both feel like Willie Green on opening night, our prediction is that he will throw out that lineup we discussed of DeJounte, Herb, Ingram, Zion, and Tice. What are your thoughts, feelings, concerns about a starting lineup with Trey Murphy in Herb Jones's place, a starting lineup of DeJounte Murray, Trey Murphy, Brandon Ingram, Zion Williamson, and Daniel Tice instead?
Look, it entirely comes down to what kind of defense Trey plays. At the end of the year, Trey played a level of defense that I think kind of gave the game away and told you that he can be like a top level wing defender. Like he has that in him when he puts his nose down and cares to that degree about that side of the ball. And my brain's going to hold him to that standard because now I saw it. I saw it for a stretch of 10 games where I was like, wow, this guy is getting up for important rebounds. This guy is blocking shots. This guy is holding his own in ISOs. If that guy is that guy, then I couldn't argue him being the guy at the 3, but the thing here is, you can lean into what you are. We are a defensive team, and Zion is the offensive weapon. I think it is easier to lean into the identity you do have. And now you have a center that's going to stay out of the way. You can't get much worse than how the starting lineup that we went to looked last year offensively in terms of like moving the ball around. So if you just swap out JV and Tice is just in the corner or in the dunker spot instead of in the paint, I think it does change things enough that it'll look a little bit better. And then you swap the guys out in rotation. Do I think Trey is going to be happy about that? Would I be happy if I was him? No, because I want to get in the starting lineup. But the person that he needs to replace is BI, and BI has not left.
I agree with that. I keep saying this just because, when I look at this roster as a whole, I'm like, this is weird. Look, DeJounte Murray, Brandon Ingram, and Zion Williamson are locks to be starters. They just are. I mean, they're just, you can't put those guys on the bench. I believe the Pelicans will start a traditional center. I don't see them starting Zion at center from the opening tip. If all of that is true, that means 2 of CJ McCollum, Trey Murphy, and Herb Jones are going to have to start games coming off of the bench last season. That's something I just keep coming back to. I think some people in the Pelicans are ready to see CJ take on a bench role. I think the Herb Jones, Trey Murphy discussion there is interesting. In an ideal world, you would love to see Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, and Zion Williamson starting together on the wings. 3 guys who I think their skill sets complement each other very well. It's just a very like logical 2-3-4 to put out there, but they can't do that because Brandon Ingram is still on this roster. All right, I'm going to go to my under points right now. Look, the first one, the Ingram situation just makes it weird. He goes into the year on an expiring deal, and it just throws the vibes off. I mean, Ingram has been like a pretty good vibes guy for the most part. It just makes it weird. Either he's like hunting too much for his offense, or he's too passive and he kind of shuts down. I think the other thing is 70 games played from Zion last year. That is, we look back and say, oh, that was an aberration. That was just luck and not the norm now. I mean, we really need that to be more of the norm. I mean, we need 60, 65 games minimum from Zion going forward. I think that's a big one. The center rotation is a complete disaster. I mean, Daniel Tice is like the only playable true center, it turns out, that they have on the roster next season, and they have to go small, and it doesn't work that well. Zion's historically been a very bad defensive rebounder. That keeps up, and they're in this division where there's so many good centers. I wrote about this, but like, think about the Southwest Division and all the bigs that the Pelicans are going to have to play 4 times a season. I mean, Alperen Şengün, Victor Wembanyama, Zach Edey, Jaren Jackson Jr., Brandon Clark, triumvirate. Derek Lively, and the bigs that they traded for last year in Dallas. I mean, this is they're going to have 16 games, just division games against teams with very, very good bigs. And they're going to be trying to, as they're constructed right now, maybe go small and fast, according to David Griffin. And the other one I got that's kind of like maybe a sleeper. Like I just said that, hey, the way they're currently constructed, 2 of Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, and CJ McCollum are going to have to come off the bench. So you think, wow, that's a ton of talent off the bench. But we kept talking about this last year, and I don't think people were very honest about it. In the regular season, the Pelicans bench was excellent last year. They were second in point differential. They had an identity. They were the defensive guys who, look, we're just going to come in and try to accentuate the stars. And it worked. It worked in the regular season. And you can talk about the playoffs because that was a different animal. But there's no question it worked during the regular season. They had an identity. They were, except for, Trey Murphy, who's a little bit of a different type of player. But like Dyson Daniels, Najee Marshall, Larry Nance Jr., like, we are coming in to defend and play hard. And they had this identity that worked. And I think there's a chance that even though there's more talent, the bench just isn't as effective this year.
Yeah, so my points are kind of slight riffs on your own points. Obviously, BI is the first question mark, and I think we could go a little farther and say, like, he's still on the team all year and not moved at the deadline. Like, specifically, he shouldn't finish the year here. You should not do this because he is not the long-term plan, and the guys who are the long-term plan deserve to play in the roles that they are going to be playing in. This market's been so weird, and it's strange to think about. It's hard to not feel like Griff misplayed this, and that a lot of people did. Like Kobe Altman, the Mobley extension comes through, and I'm still looking over there like, you guys are really going to do him as a power forward? Okay, it's never been good, but Kenny Atkinson's just going to magically make him shoot threes now. I think a lot of teams had trouble moving guys that historically they'd have been able to move, and it's because of the aprons and having to match the salary.
It's like a perfect storm of BI and the Pelicans being stuck. Basically, it's the new cap environment. It's Ingram just playing with a bunch of other very good players in Team USA and looking horrible. I mean, just being an absolute disaster. It's Ingram, coming off this pretty bad knee injury and looking terrible in the playoffs. That, I commend him for trying to get out there, but it's this like perfect confluence of events for they are stuck with Brandon Ingram.
Yeah, and so only a couple of real spots, exist where he could have gone. And I wonder how much that shifts when now he goes into the season as a true expiring, and teams see their records and their injuries and see, like, okay, we can really make a run here. Can we add this 20.5.5 assists a game guy and do something? And he's really long, like this, like Kevin Durant light kind of dude, and just give us some more punch. And that new look for him and the need to get that next contract could really like work out for those teams. And it also, like, if you're buying an expiring, price level for us and for that team, probably a little more aligned than how it would have been all summer. So yeah, if he stays on this team in the playoffs, I'm going to say that was a bad call. And also, like, just to be like very frank and honest, like they got to add another center body, like an actual rotational center body. Carlo has looked great and has looked better than even the crazies can say they thought he was going to look. Penciling him in for 20 to 25 minutes is nuts. Penciling Misi in for any minutes out the gate is nuts. There needs to be another guy because
once again, there's one true center on this roster who has actually played NBA minutes.
And he's almost out of the NBA. Like he's right there. He's not that far from being like done here and going and playing in Europe. He can really only hold down like 20 minutes, and he's got his own like jump happy fouling. He's athletic and he tries to give you rim presence, but he hacks some guys. Like you're going to have scenarios right now with how the center position's set up where I can just see if, say, it's these three guys and Misi actually has to play like 10 minutes. I can see a scenario where Tice gets into early foul trouble and you're laying it in to you're leaning on Carlo in a way that's just should not happen. And all of a sudden, like Misi's in for a rotation, picks up 2-3 quick fouls. And now you got 1.5 dudes to get through a half of basketball. That's the level of like risk you have right now at the center position. I think there's got to be another body. So if they don't add a center and BI doesn't leave at the deadline, then I think you're going under. Simple as that. And I do also to just take the point a little more like psychosocial, emotional on BI and the role this year. What I'll specifically say about the vibes, my concern is not his professionalism, his ability to practice, showing up for work, doing all the right things, saying all the right things. It's you're averaging 13 points. You're shooting 3 less shots than last year, and you're really, really in the dumps about it. He has not been somebody that has been able to put on a poker face in those situations and come out there and just play through it, forget about it, be in the next game. He's been a dude that those kind of things have really affected him. At the same time, I will give him the credit of January to March of last year. He bought in really hard when his scoring wasn't there, and he gave you more, even though it was imperfect, he gave you more of the off ball, the defense, more of that effort. And it did contribute to winning games, even though his point totals and his shooting went down. I don't know how it's going to shake out, but it's not him, the guy. It's the ability to not let his emotions bleed onto the floor and into the locker room because of how he feels about his own performance.
Look, just zooming out and like kind of examining the series of events that led the Pelicans here to this point where the word people keep using is stuck. And I think that's a good, accurate word. They're kind of stuck right now with this roster that there's talent here, but it doesn't really make sense in terms of basketball fit. Look, 2 years ago, Brandon Ingram missed 29 games in a row with an injury they described as toe contusion, yada, yada, yada. He played well down the stretch. Zion missed basically the last half of the season with a hamstring injury that the Pelicans were not really forthcoming on the details of why, but from everything I've been able to gather, he basically just was not diligent in the rehab process, like didn't work as hard as he needed to, and they put their foot in the ground and said, no, like we're not going to let you back in the court. And so 2 summers ago, the Pelicans explored trading Zion. They were not going to trade Brandon Ingram. And I guess I can understand it from that perspective because Zion was coming off of a season where he didn't really try that much in the rehab process. And my feeling during that stretch run was we should just play him anyway. Like my thing was like the Stan Van Gundy, he needs to play. And I think the Pelicans adopted that mentality last season and they got pretty good results. He played in 70 games. And this past season, I think they looked at it and they're like, we need to rejigger our roster around Zion. And they looked at trading Brandon and his value, and because of the cap environment, was just in the dumps. And so they couldn't have gotten off him. So it's like you could have rejiggered the roster around Zion 2 years ago by moving in when his value was much higher. but they didn't want to do that because Zion had just missed the last half of the year with his hamstring thing and didn't take his rehab seriously. And I think the Pelicans mishandled a lot of that too by just not letting him play again. I thought that was a miscalculation, but all of that's led us here to where to this stuck scenario.
You did an appropriate accounting of what that time period was like. And that's the thing that I want very badly for people not to forget the nuance of what was going on during those years. We literally just last season, for the first time, saw a sizable sample of the two guys playing together. It finally happened. That's what they were waiting for, because the best outcome for a small market team having a former all-star or having two former all-stars on the same team is that they stay playing together and play well. You cannot quit on them until they have played together and you've seen what it is. And Griff's magic words at the end of the season were, I think we've seen enough. So, yet it's still here and a little awkward, but look, I'm open to a lot of things now. I think there were a couple of realities. I think a lot of people will go draw up trade machines and try and figure out, maybe you can go to Toronto, whatever. I think you got to be really honest about who would want to give him an extension right now and ride this whole year out and try and figure out, like, right now, if you're signing him, it's because you want him to be fundamental to your future. If you're buying him at the deadline, it's a little bit of a different argument. Hey, we can make this bet on this guy for the rest of the year. And if it really pops off, we can maybe make something work and he can stick around. It's a different conversation at the start of the year. And when people aren't really clearing their tax books yet. So it'll be interesting to see how it develops. I think we had a couple of destinations. One of them just never moved anything. I think Cleveland is making a terrible mistake, and we'll just watch it play out and we'll see what happens. And maybe that's still the stare down, but maybe it's still that.
I think Cleveland's fixable, just because Jared Allen is still very, very tradable and has value because he's only making $20 million. So $20 million this season and $20 million next season. Brandon Ingram is a very good player. It's just nobody wants to pay that next contract. That's the issue. If Brandon Ingram was locked in at a number like 35, I think people would be lining up. It's that, it's the, oh God, we're gonna have to pay this guy $52 million a year, 30% of the cap. That's the issue. So I think Cleveland, they can change it a lot easier than the Pelicans can.
But at the same time, Jared Allen's contract is dwindling. They don't have a market for him right now. That's why they didn't trade him and Garland, because they did not have markets for those players that they were happy with. They've had prices. I'm sure their prices have been high. BI's market come the deadline is guy has two months left on his contract. It is a different asset come February than it is what it is right now. Right now, it is needs to get his extension. At the deadline, does it matter? He's going to run his contract out with us, or he's going to go somewhere else. I think who he is as an asset and what you're willing to take and what you're willing to do with your team at that point is a lot more obvious and hard to argue against. Jared Allen is a more valuable player. I don't think they had a market for him during the summer they were happy with. I am still intrigued to see once if we get into January and those plus minus numbers, when those two guards and those two centers play at the same time, are still as bad as they are, he's the guy that you can and have to move. And can you figure something out? It's still interesting. I don't know if it'd still be for BI though, because it really depends what kind of contract he's looking for and what he's willing to say to people.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the whole thing here. I mean, do Brandon and his agent kind of back off of the stance that, yes, I am a player absolutely deserving of 30% of the salary cap, or they feel like, hey, look, there's a middle ground here. I'd be happy with $160 million over 4 years or whatever, especially if I was going to be a part of a winning situation. I mean, $40 million a year, that's not bad living.
Get a 1+1 or a 2+1 and come back when the money's gargantuan and take your next shot. There are next scenarios. If he believes in himself to this degree and wants to be that guy again, then take the shorter deal and, get the piece of it that makes you feel good, whether it's a little bit higher number or a player option at the end to let you exit when you want. This money's about to jump. And even if you're not a max guy in a couple of years, gonna feel pretty good and be the same number that it would be like this year if you were a max dude this year. You can get 40 million 2 years from now, just not right now. The cap didn't really go up, but it will go up pretty seismically soon.
All right, Adam. Deep summer mode. I'm going on vacation next week. You are too. I think unless anything happens, we're probably going to plan on taking the week off. It has been an interesting summer for the Pelicans so far. I'm actually very excited to watch DeJounte Murray in a New Orleans uniform next year. I just he fires me up all the workout posts, man. Like the guy's in there grinding. I'm seeing the story and he's like, let's go. This is inspiring me.
Look, he's gonna talk the talk at the very least. And as much as, if you go read posts from Hawks fans right now, you're gonna think that the guy's an absolute cancer. However, I would go look at his teammates' numbers when he was the point guard because they seem like they were pretty happy. So I'm very excited to see him play here. I'm excited to see, for the first time in a couple of years, us get harassed on ball above the perimeter, like above the 3-point line, and have a guy survive that pressure. Because, like, in a small way, just having a guy that can run a pick and roll, that can't just get blasted off the line, get blasted out of position, that in and of itself, by itself, is just going to be a nice thing to have. And he's competitive as hell. We've talked for years about wanting to have like one of those psycho guys. He's a little bit of a psycho guy. So, hey, let's roll the ball out. Let's see what we get. At the very least, he's going to be exciting. And look, if we've said this before. I feel like I said this last year. If there was ever a time for Brandon Ingram to start taking the perimeter jumpers, the catch and shoots, the early goes, the transition threes, there is no time like the present, brother.
We've literally been saying this for 3 years in a row. Hey, maybe the fourth time will be the charm.
He's gonna have he's not gonna have as much of the ball. I don't know. Like, if he wants his point totals, it might be for the wrong reason. But if you want to score 20 points, you're going to have to take more threes because you're just not going to have it that often relative to the past. And you already dipped by 3% usage last year.
All right, Adam. Thanks for doing this, buddy. Enjoy your time off, your well-deserved time off. We will get together and do this again soon.
All right, buddy. You too.